Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night feeling angry, anxious, depressed, or just generally upset for no reason whatsoever? Maybe with a pounding headache? Well, guess what? It's not 5G. It's a natural, normal response to being overloaded with images designed to evoke emotional responses. You can only feel so many things at once. And there are so many businesses and different entities out there that want you to feel certain things in reaction to their advertising that your brain just can't process it during your waking hours. So then when you fall asleep and it begins to sort out all the images, that's when all of a sudden it hits you. That's why some people can't sleep at all. That's why some people turn to pharmaceutical remedies, which actually exacerbates the problem. There's a war going on for your mind. It is the preeminent battlefield of the 21st century. And if you're not educated, if you're not informed about these tactics and what they're trying to do, you'll be powerless. You'll be lost on that battlefield. Rule 1. Never engage in any kind of emotional self-reflection unless you're in the presence of another person, physically. Meaning, if you're just looking at your phone, looking at a screen, make sure you stay out of your, quote-unquote, your feels, your emotions. Anything done online should always result just in thought and thought only. That's a defense mechanism. We need to start treating our minds like castles. There needs to be a guard shack. There needs to be a moat. There needs to be multiple levels of walls and defenses. In here, nothing online. The only thing that should be at your core are your relationships. If you'd like to know more about how to get control of your mind in the 21st century, join us over at Patreon. It's only $1, $1 US per month. If it could be less, I would charge less. But that's the minimum they allow me to charge. It's even less, though, if you sign up for a year. It comes out to something like 90 cents. We've been able to partner with Vimeo to keep these videos away from Google and their censors. And we put up a brand new one earlier this morning. It's the 6th in a series, Gloves Off, showing you what the media is doing. And I'll warn you, this most recent one is probably the most controversial. There are a lot of clips from different series that have been shown throughout the years that reveal things about the 24 logical fallacies, the 24 cognitive biases that make people believe up is down, left is right, good is evil, right is wrong. And some people don't even understand anymore the difference between culture and religion. Join us. Now, in today's video, I'd like to kind of dovetail off of this on another topic. You look at an image like this, and it evokes a certain image in your mind. It looks like some type of a perhaps medieval battlefield toward the evening, maybe after a long day of marching or a battle, and they've got some kind of food cooking over a fire. It evokes a positive response. You're like, oh, man, that looks fantastic. I'll bet that's going to be delicious when it's done cooking. Same thing here. You got the cast iron pot. You got the fire glowing in the background, the steam coming off of it. Looks like somebody's getting ready to ladle something up, and it just looks so delicious. You see, people can look at this, just an image, two-dimensional, light image, and they can almost smell the stew. Their mouth starts to water. Perhaps even their stomach starts to rumble. The vast majority of the people looking at it aren't hungry, but just this image can make them feel as if they were. just a two-dimensional image. This is why in the evenings you see all of the restaurant commercials that make you hungry. And you get hungry at night. And night's not a good time to eat. But how many people do this? They wake up in the middle of the night and they feel hungry. They don't know why they feel hungry. They've eaten everything they were supposed to during the day. It's clear that they've had the proper amount of calories. It has to do with these subtle images that your brain can't all process at once. And later at night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, when your brain has the ability to sort out all these images, the following emotions are inevitable. Rational versus emotional behavior. People have confused these things. There are people, the vast majority, if you don't know how to positively do this in your life, are just assessing emotion after emotion after emotion, believing they're thinking. Believing it's thought, when really it's just reacting to emotion. And it is accepted fact that when you add emotion to any event or any thought, it makes it unforgettable. They learned this a long time ago with TV commercials. If they could evoke some kind of an emotion and assign it to their product, the thing they were trying to sell, people would remember their slogans, their little ditties, the name of their brand, all this kind of stuff. All derived at separating you from your money. Canada. When you think of Canada, what do you think of? Friendly people. It's kind of a meme, really. It's kind of a joke that the Canadians are super ultra nice, and many people would think, well, or they would believe they would be thinking, that's how we all should be. We should be friendly. We should be nice. On every hand, we should, say stuff like, your mom is a nice lady. Canadian vandalism, have a nice day. Big old thumbs up. See, for years, this was thought of as, gosh, they're just great. But what do we know about Canada now? Between Canada and Australia, they are the vanguard of tyranny on the planet. Why? Because their people are too nice. There's such a thing as too nice. 16 January 2022, thousands of churches raise alarm about scope of new Canadian conversion therapy ban. More than 4,000 pastors protested against a Canadian law that describes biblical morality as a myth. That's right. A myth. You see, this is what them being nice for decades and decades and decades has done. It has allowed tyrants to get into positions of power, and they know they have a nice, pliable population, kind of unlike Florida. It's literally the opposite. Now, you ready to have your mind blown? Some people would say, well, you know what, McKee? America would be a lot better if we could get back to the church of the 1920s and 30s, if we could somehow go back to this way of believing and thinking and acting, we'd have a much stronger society, much more moral society. What if I told you that one of the greatest criminals of the last 10 years would have likely walked free had these folks been in charge, or had that crime been committed during their era? What we called a crime, they wouldn't have called a crime. What we call a crime, they wouldn't have. You see, they had a very different version of what morality was, even though they read the same Bible as you or I do or the modern church does. They had a wildly different view of right and wrong and assigning blame and assigning guilt. You see, there was a time, believe it or not, when American Christians of that era were socialists. I'll give you this link. I've covered it before. You see, illegal is not necessarily immoral, and immoral is not necessarily always illegal. We cover this at the Patreon channel today, and I show specific examples of somebody doing something that is perceived to be immoral, that is actually moral, but not illegal, and somebody else doing something that is perceived to be moral, which is actually both immoral and illegal, but nobody sees it. It comes from the series Colony, we've talked about before. There was an episode of Colony, that series, named Maquis, season 3, episode 1, I believe. And that's why I've kind of focused on this series, because it does show psychological operations in all its glory. Now, what am I talking about? I referenced this yesterday. You see, the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s church wouldn't have had an issue with Epstein or Prince Andrew or any of it. You see, the laws at that time were very different about what a quote-unquote child was. If you had taken an image like this and said, we're going to charge this man on the left with improperly acting with a child, the first question the 1920s or 1930s or 1940s church would have asked you is, where's the child? We don't see a child. Where's the child? We see a young woman who's dressed wildly inappropriately. And if this man has done something inappropriate, it's likely her fault, or more likely her parents' fault for raising her this way, and she needs to cover up. If he's married, then he needs to go repent. But it would have never seen the light of day in court. It would have never seen the light of day. They would have never gone to law. They would have shamed the man, but it would have never gone to law. And it took me forever to find this. chnm.gmu.edu. I'm not even going to try to read this. I'll give you the link. It is a age of consent laws table in years gone by in different areas of Europe and in the United States. 1880, 1920, and 2007. Now some say, well, why should we care about 1880 or 1920? Well, are you talking about morality or are you talking about legality? Because morality is based on the Bible. Legality is based on law and culture of the time. So if you're trying to equate the two, the modern church, the modern moralists out there, would say that the church of 1880 was wildly immoral. Look at the age of consent. 10 in 1880. 12. 10. 12. 10. 10. 10. 12. Delaware, 7. In 1880. 140 years ago. And people will say 140 years ago, the church was a lot more in line with biblical teaching than they are now. Really? By 1920, it had been raised somewhat. 12, 12, 12, 14, 14, 16. The United States started to move it up a lot more. But in Georgia, it was still 14. And even though this were the law, they didn't go to law over this. Back then, it wasn't something that was gone to law over. It was something that was settled with the parents. Privately. And many would say, well, that's wildly inappropriate. How could that possibly be? How could you justify such a thing? Well, what are we talking about? Morality or legality? But it's illegal. Saying that something is illegal is not an argument, it's an appeal to authority. Laws, while they're not really arbitrary dictates, they're dictates of the culture at the time to control a population at the time, not universal standards of morality. You see this image and you think, wow, the nuclear family, that's so great. When you watch the series, though, if you look at it coldly, in a calculated way, you'll see something very different. See, this is the issue. This is why they had cartoons like this. We'll start our own church with blackjack and hookers, because they believe morality fluctuates with culture. And truly it does. The actual teachings of the Bible, what they'll tell you now in a church versus what they would tell you in 1980 in a church versus 1920 in a church, all calling themselves a Christian church, would be wildly different. I remember what I was taught growing up in the church. I know what was taught in the 1990s, and I know what's taught now. Just in that amount of time. It only takes a cursory study of history, going back 100 years, to see how different it was even then. But wait a minute. How can that be? They're using the same book. They're using the same book. How can they possibly be determining so wildly different things from the same book? Because they're confusing culture with Christianity. They're confusing morality with legality. And that's what's really going on. And that is why people wake up in the middle of the night, their heads screaming, and they don't know why. Because the human brain has the ability to sort out on its own logic from illogic. It's a survival mechanism. So much inundation during the day, it can't be processed. This is why it's critical to get out of your emotions when you're not in the presence of someone else. Because that's all we were designed to do, emotionally, deal with one person at a time. The rest, thought. And I'll leave it there. God bless. Have a wonderful week. Join us over at Patreon if you'd like more training, if you'd like more truth, if you'd like the gloves to be off and to hear the real story. Love to see you there. God bless. Have a great week. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.